Nuclear War Survival Skills. Chapter 1. The Dangers from Nuclear Weapons, Myths and Facts.
An all-out nuclear war between Russia and the United States would be the worst catastrophe in history. A tragedy so huge it is difficult to comprehend. Even so, it would be far from the end of human life on Earth. The dangers from nuclear weapons have been distorted and exaggerated for varied reasons. These exaggerations have become demoralizing myths believed by millions of Americans.
While working with hundreds of Americans building expedient shelters and life support equipment, I have found that many people at first see no sense in talking about details of survival skills. Those who hold exaggerated beliefs about the dangers from nuclear weapons must first be convinced that nuclear war would not inevitably be the end of them and everything worthwhile. Only after they have begun to question the truth of these myths do they become interested, under normal peacetime conditions, in acquiring nuclear war survival skills. Therefore, before giving detailed instructions for making and using survival equipment, we will examine the most harmful of the myths about nuclear war dangers, along with some of the grim facts.
Myth. Fallout radiation from a nuclear war would poison the air and all parts of the environment. It would kill everyone. This is the demoralizing message of On the Beach and many similar pseudoscientific books and articles.
Facts. When a nuclear weapon explodes near enough to the ground for its fireball to touch the ground, it forms a crater. See Figure 1.1. Many thousands of tons of earth from the crater of a large explosion are pulverized into trillions of particles. These particles are contaminated by radioactive atoms produced by the nuclear explosion. Thousands of tons of the particles are carried up into a mushroom-shaped cloud, miles above the Earth. These radioactive particles then fall out of the mushroom cloud, or out of the dispersing cloud of particles blown by the winds, thus becoming fallout. Each contaminated particle continuously gives off invisible radiation, much like a tiny X-ray machine, while in the mushroom cloud, while descending, and after having fallen to Earth. The descending radioactive particles are carried by the winds like the sand and dust particles of a miles-thick sandstorm cloud, except that they usually are blown at lower speeds, and in many areas the particles are so far apart that no cloud is seen. The largest, heaviest fallout particles reach the ground first, in locations close to the explosion. Many smaller particles are carried by the winds for tens to thousands of miles before falling to Earth. At any one place where fallout from a single explosion is being deposited on the ground in concentrations high enough to require the use of shelters, deposition will be completed within a few hours. The smallest fallout particles, those tiny enough to be inhaled into a person's lungs, are invisible to the naked eye. These tiny particles would fall so slowly from the 4-mile or greater heights to which they would be injected by currently deployed Soviet warheads that most would remain airborne for weeks to years before reaching the ground. By that time, their extremely wide dispersal and radioactive decay would make them much less dangerous. Only where such tiny particles are promptly brought to Earth by rainouts or snowouts in scattered hotspots and later dried and blown about by the winds, would these invisible particles constitute a long-term and relatively minor post-attack danger. The air in properly designed fallout shelters, even those without air filters, is free of radioactive particles and safe to breathe except in a few rare environments, as will be explained later. Fortunately for all living things, the danger from fallout radiation lessens with time. The radioactive decay, as this lessening is called, is rapid at first, then gets slower and slower. The dose rate, the amount of radiation received per hour, decreases accordingly. Figure 1.2 illustrates the rapidity of the decay of radiation from fallout during the first 2 days after the nuclear explosion that produced it. R stands for Röntgen, a measurement unit often used to measure exposure to gamma rays and X-rays. Fallout meters, called dosimeters, measure the dose received by recording the number of R. Fallout meters, called survey meters or dose rate meters, measure the dose rate by recording the number of R being received per hour at the time of measurement. Notice that it takes about 7 times as long for the dose rate to decay from 1,000 Röntgens per hour, 1,000 R per hour, to 10 R per hour, 48 hours, as to decay from 1,000 R per hour to 100 R per hour, 7 hours. Only in high fallout areas would the dose rate 1 hour after the explosion be as high as 1,000 Röntgens per hour. If the dose rate 1 hour after an explosion is 1,000 R per hour, It would take about 2 weeks for the dose rate to be reduced to 1 R per hour, solely as a result of radioactive decay. Weathering effects will reduce the dose rate further. For example, rain can wash fallout particles from plants and houses to lower positions on or closer to the ground. Surrounding objects would reduce the radiation dose from these low-lying particles. Figure 1.2 also illustrates the fact that at a typical location where a given amount of fallout from an explosion is deposited later than 1 hour after the explosion, the highest dose rate and the total dose received at that location are less than at a location where the same amount of fallout is deposited 1 hour after the explosion. The longer fallout particles have been airborne before reaching the ground, the less dangerous is their radiation. Within 2 weeks after an attack, the occupants of most shelters could safely stop using them or could work outside the shelters for an increasing number of hours each day. Exceptions would be in areas of extremely heavy fallout, such as might occur downwind from important targets attacked with many weapons, especially missile sites in very large cities. To know when to come out safely, occupants either would need a reliable fallout meter to measure the changing radiation dangers or must receive information based on measurements made nearby with a reliable instrument.
The radiation dose that will kill a person varies considerably with different people. A dose of 450 R, resulting from exposure of the whole body to fallout radiation, is often said to be the dose that will kill about half the persons receiving it, although most studies indicate that it would take somewhat less. Almost all persons confined to expedient shelters after a nuclear attack would be under stress and without clean surroundings or antibiotics to fight infections. Many also would lack adequate water and food. Under these unprecedented conditions, perhaps half the persons who received a whole body dose of 350 R within a few days would die. Fortunately, the human body can repair most radiation damage if the daily radiation doses are not too large. As will be explained in Appendix B, a person who is healthy and has not been exposed in the past 2 weeks to a total radiation dose of more than 100 R can receive a dose of 6 R each day for at least 2 months without being incapacitated. Only a very small fraction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki citizens who survived radiation doses, some of which were nearly fatal, have suffered serious delayed effects. The rather low failure rate to do essential work after a massive nuclear attack, many survivors must be willing to receive much larger radiation doses than are normally permissible. Otherwise, too many workers would stay inside shelter too much of the time, and work that would be vital to national recovery could not be done. For example, if the great majority of truckers were so fearful of receiving even non-incapacitating radiation doses that they would refuse to transport food, additional millions would die from starvation alone. This concludes this installment of the Hale visual audiobook adaptation of the Cold War classic, Nuclear War Survival Skills, by Crescent Carney. We encourage you to download the free PDF or order a printed copy of the original book from the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine at oism.org. Also available to purchase are detailed videos of Crescent Carney showcasing and demonstrating his life's work, including making the Carney Fallout Meter, or KFM, from materials you probably already have around your home. For millions, this DIY device would be their only way to accurately and reliably measure their exposure to harmful radiation. Already made by many school children and their families over the years, plans for the KFM are included in the free PDF linked in this video description. However, printed copies will have KFM plans and instructions that are carefully printed to exact scale for accurate readings. Join us next time for the next installment, Chapter 1, Part B, of Nuclear War Survival Skills, by Crescent Carney. Thank you for listening to this audiobook presentation by Hale Digital Arts.
Hey!